Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Please take your seats so we can get started. Please take your seats. All right. Anita, you ready for the roll?
Councilmember Morrell,
Here.
Councilmember Giarrusso, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember King is present, Councilmember Green.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. First up, we have the approval of the minutes for the August 31st meeting. Councilman Green moves to approve the minutes for the meeting. Councilman Harris seconds. Please vote your machines. While we do it by acclamation,
What's up?
is anyone up? Oh, there, what's up? All right, go ahead and vote your machines. All right, the minutes are approved. First up, we have the Healthy Homes Ordinance to present. We have Dr. Jennifer Avegno, Director, New Orleans Health Department, Max Chartulo with Policy Analyst with Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, and Hannah Adams, Staff Attorney, Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. Whenever y'all are ready.
Thank you, Councilman Morrell and the rest of the council members for having us here today to talk about this really critical need in our city. And I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the administration in support of the Healthy Homes Ordinance. There is very strong evidence that characterizes housing's direct relationship to health. Housing stability, quality, safety, and affordability all directly affect individual and community health outcomes, as do the physical built environment characteristics of a home and neighborhood. Access to safe, reliable, and affordable housing is a key national, regional, and local health priority. It is thought that at least 10% of an individual's health outcome are directly tied to environmental exposures such as lead, mold, extremes of heat and cold, among others. Furthermore, cost burdens of high-priced rents contribute to economic insecurity for many, making it difficult or impossible for renters to dedicate adequate funding for health and well-being needs. In New Orleans, more than half of renters are considered cost burdened, which means they pay significant portions of their monthly income solely in rent. Many national organizations and reports have identified housing programs and initiatives that support health. A National League of Cities report in 2021 starts with the premise that every person, especially children, needs access to healthy and hazard-free housing in order to thrive and reach their full potential. But according to this report, nearly 40% of metropolitan homes across the country have at least one health or safety hazard. Again, things like mold, lead, broken heating and plumbing, rodent and roach infestations. And these poor quality housing conditions can increase exposure to disease and exacerbate existing chronic disease such as asthma and other conditions. If we look at New Orleans, a study done over 1 year found that thousands of households in our metropolitan area experience a variety of poor quality issues: mold, roaches, electric and plumbing, and rodents, just to name a few. And again, all of these are placing our tenants at higher risk of illness and worsened chronic diseases. In addition to these direct physical impacts of unsanitary or substandard housing, living conditions are a major equity issue for those in our community. A recent study this year in Boston found that tenants in low income and communities of color consistently reported more issues with indoor air quality, mold, and pest infestations than those living in more affluent white areas. And furthermore, in New Orleans, our renters are disproportionately low-income individuals of color. We have the 5th highest percentage of cost burden renters. When a household is cost burdened because of rent, they have difficulty affording other necessities like food, clothing, transportation, and critical medical care. One national study indeed found that severely cost-burdened renters, like many in our city, are forced to spend up to 25% less on food. So that's a direct effect. When renters are forced to spend a large portion of their earnings on rent and they receive a variable quality of housing, they have less to give to their basic needs that will contribute to their health. The problem of both unhealthy and economically burdensome housing is a solvable one, and it aligns with key city and administration priorities. Our local New Orleans community health assessment and planning process, which was done over the past several years with countless regional, civic, nonprofit, healthcare partners, collaborators, many of whom are in this room, identified healthy housing as a key priority to improve the overall outcomes in our community. Specifically, it is one of our main strategic priorities to ensure that all people have access to safe, sanitary, and stable housing regardless of income, with key metrics that we are tracking of reducing exposure to health hazards within the home, increasing housing stability, and reducing exposure to urban heat. The Healthy Homes Ordinance presented today will be critical to achieving this goal. Similar regulations have been enacted in numerous cities around the country, including more than 20 in our neighbor, Texas. And though they've shown positive impacts in communities big and small, this ordinance will provide an additional benefit, somewhat unique to New Orleans, but also other places in the Gulf Coast, the ability to have a complete list and increased visibility on renters during emergencies. In the aftermath of Hurricane Ida, our team and other public agencies had to rely on word of mouth to identify where vulnerable renters were, and we had no information on the overall conditions of rental properties. Having a certification system to ensure minimum baseline standards for habitability would have helped us tremendously to prioritize our outreach and our evacuation efforts. In COVID, a clear picture of where rental units were clustered might have helped us further refine and target our approach to testing, resources, and vaccinations in a more person-centered approach. My team and many in the city have seen firsthand the deadly consequences of substandard housing or when minimum habitability standards are not met. Through this ordinance and others, we must never allow that to happen again. So we believe that changes in city policies, programs, and practices are urgently needed to ensure that all children, all families live in healthy and hazard-free homes. This is supported by national best practices to support housing codes, guidelines, regulations to not only address those in-home hazards, but empowering, educating owners and tenants about the dangers of unsafe and unhealthy housing and about their rights and responsibilities. And this ordinance does just that. By requiring minimum standards for habitability, it provides stability and expectations that all renters can expect when looking for a home, free from mold, free from excess environmental exposures, free from extremes of heat and cold, which we've seen to be deadly, and all of which should significantly improve our health outcomes. Research has shown that simply improving housing conditions leads to fewer need to go to the doctor, particularly with our elderly residents. This ordinance puts minimal cost burden on landlords for certification and provides a mechanism for tenants being subjected to unhealthy or unsafe conditions to formally request assistance from the city. So we really believe today is an opportunity for residents, landlords, health professionals, and housing advocates to work together to be champions for people's health, to support their readiness to work and learn, and to help them become more financially secure. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Adams. I'm a staff attorney at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. If you can turn to the next slide, please. Oh, thank you. As you know, SLLS is the free civil legal aid provider that serves low-income tenants in New Orleans. Thank you so much to Councilmember Morrell for inviting me here today to present some information to the committee about the current state of the law and also about the issues our clients face when it comes to critical repairs to their rental homes. A large percentage of the calls we get to our intake line are from tenants whose landlords refuse to make critical repairs. I reviewed our recent logs in preparing for this. And just in the last week, we have gotten calls from a tenant with a rodent infestation, a tenant who has had no working air conditioning for nearly 2 months in the middle of summer, a tenant with serious mold, and a tenant with an unmitigated water leak her landlord will not fix. Many of our callers and clients are seniors, people with disabilities, and people with young children. These tenants are desperate. And they're calling us with one question: how do I get my landlord to make repairs so that my house is livable? Unfortunately, under our current system, there is no simple answer to this question. Because New Orleans is experiencing an affordable housing crisis, I don't need to tell you guys that, increasing numbers of families that we serve are forced to live in extremely substandard rental housing conditions that have, including serious health and safety issues. Louisiana law requires landlords to make repairs to ensure that a house remains livable. However, right now, this is basically a right without a remedy. State law provides for 2 basic options where a landlord refuses to make repairs. A tenant can terminate their lease, but that remedy often doesn't work for our clients because they can't afford to move. Or a tenant can do something called repair and deduct. That's a complicated process where the client has to dip into their hypothetical pile of extra money and pay for a repair out of pocket and then deduct it from a future month's rent. So in other words, they have to pay this month's rent, then front the extra money for the repair, and then deduct it from next month's rent. And our clients just simply don't have that kind of money. Most low and middle income renters in the city don't have that kind of money. Not to mention the fact that many of the types of repairs that we see as a repair need are much more expensive than a single month's rent anyway. State law contains no protection against retaliation. At least half of my clients rent month to month, and that's because their original lease, at the end of its term rolls over month to month under state law. This means that state law permits their landlord to evict them at the end of any month with as little as 10 days notice for no reason at all. Month-to-month tenants simply have no way of enforcing their right to safe, habitable housing because there is nothing stopping their landlord from turning around and evicting them in retaliation a couple weeks later. All the landlord has to do is say they want possession, no reason needed. There is also nothing stopping them from doubling the rent at the end of the month because the tenant complained about repairs. As long as they don't say explicitly that they are raising the rent in retaliation, there's nothing we as attorneys can do to stop this constructive eviction from happening. This is why a system that depends entirely on tenant complaints in a jurisdiction without protection against eviction for no cause fundamentally does not work. Tenants cannot complain to their landlord, to code enforcement, to anyone without risking being put on the street with absolutely no recourse. And you can see from this slide that a number of other places have come to the same conclusion about the problems with a complaint-based code enforcement system. Recently, the city spent millions of dollars essentially evacuating tenants off of the Oakmont property in Algiers, which was flooded with sewage, covered in mold, and literally collapsing on tenants. If our existing enforcement system worked, Oakmont would never have been allowed to get to that point. On Tuesday, you probably saw on the news tenants from the Willows apartments in the east and Park Fontaine in Algiers talking about the substandard conditions they're living in and their landlord's failure to make repairs. You probably know both those properties are owned by the same landlord, and they have been in bad shape for years. This is not a post-Ida situation. They've been in bad shape for as long as I have been doing this work. And if our existing enforcement system was working, they would never have been allowed to decline to that point. The system is broken, but it can be fixed. State law empowers local jurisdictions to enforce their housing and minimum property maintenance codes. Currently, enforcement is not working, which is why so many of our clients are living in such substandard rental housing conditions. But this does not have anything to do with the extremely competent, hardworking people who work at code enforcement. It's a systemic failure. The reason the system doesn't work is because, number one, the whole system depends on tenant complaints currently. And number two, tenants can't complain without protection from retaliation. Again, state law allows the city to enforce the municipal codes, and it is impossible for the city to enforce its minimum property maintenance code without addressing these two issues. One way that the Healthy Homes Ordinance, as written, addresses these issues is through an anti-retaliation provision. I want to note some strengths and limitations of this provision. This type of anti-retaliation provision is standard in 43 other states. It comes from the Unified Residential Landlord Tenant Act, which is model legislation that most states have adopted, including Texas, Georgia, and Kentucky. Under the provision in the ordinance, renters who request repairs or file complaints related to the ordinance would be protected from retaliation unless a landlord can show a legitimate non-retaliatory reason for their action. As an example, filing for eviction is not retaliatory if the renter is not current on rent, because that is a legitimate non-retaliatory reason to evict. Maxwell will explain more about the ordinance details, but this sort of protection will be especially helpful for the half of rental units that won't actually be subject to periodic inspections under the ordinance as currently written. I also want to note a pretty significant limitation on this provision in case anyone thinks we can rely solely on anti-retaliation protections and continue along with our broken complaint-based system. I know that everyone here understands that New Orleans has been in a housing crisis since Katrina. Wages here just don't cover the cost of living for more than half of renters. As a reminder, the typical renter only makes about $25,000 a year, obviously by the pandemic, Hurricane Ida, and then inflation. So it should come as no surprise. And I do have lots of clients who are very hardworking, but still regularly fall behind on rent. And it should also come as no surprise that lower income families that may fall behind on rent are also more likely to be living in substandard housing. This is often the case with my clients. They are living in legitimately dangerous conditions, but have also fallen behind on rent. And they will not be protected by this anti-retaliation provision because, again, their landlords do have a legitimate non-retaliatory reason to evict. So that's, again, why these two things go hand in hand. We need the retaliation protection and we need to get away from the complaint-based system. The anti-retaliation provision will also offer protections, important protections to many people. But as the department head in DC said, where they already have these anti-retaliation protections, a proactive system is still necessary to ensure we are catching the bad actors. And I'll just close by saying that, the bottom line is that at the end of the day, a functional system cannot depend on the victims of unhealthy and dangerous housing conditions risking the roof over their heads in order to enforce the law. Thank you.
Hi, council members. I'm Maxwell Chartulo, Director of Policy and Communications with the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. The Fair Housing Action Center is a more than 25-year-old civil rights nonprofit serving the whole state, based here in New Orleans, founded to fight housing discrimination and segregation. And so I'm going to spend a little time giving you a little background on where the ordinance comes from and then provide a summary of what it will do. And so health and safety violations in rental housing is not a traditional housing discrimination issue. It certainly disproportionately impacts low-income renters of color. And I would think that it actually impacts homeowners of color and Black homeowners in particular in the city because of historic patterns of segregation and disinvestment and where these properties exist and which neighborhoods they're most plentiful. But it's not something that we can typically litigate under the Fair Housing Act. So the reason that we're involved is because, like SLLS, for decades, one of the #1 calls that we've received is from clients who are stuck in these places asking for help, and we have had nothing to provide. And so just to give you a sense of the longevity of the issue, this is a recent headline, 2022, this year about Laura and Howard Russell, who own about 30 smaller properties in Uptown. These are 1, 2, 3, 4 unit buildings often. And a quick Google search will pull up a similar story from 2010 on the exact same landlords. It's worth noting here that these landlords were actually subject to a years-long crusade by former city council member Stacey Head She worked very hard for a number of years to finally get them through the code enforcement system and get them fined. At that point, the city was not doing any code enforcement on occupied rental units, so she really pushed this through. And she succeeded. They were fined something like $20,000 or $30,000 a couple of years after this. But it's actually a good example of how broken the system is, because despite that fine, the landlords absorbed that cost as a cost of doing business and re-rented their slummy units, and they're in the paper again now, right? So we have no consistent enforcement. Hannah also mentioned issues with the Oakmont apartments owned by Josh Bruno. Obviously, these have been a problem for a long time. Just as an example, this is a recent headline, but then this is our photos from clients from 2016, where you can see ceilings collapsed and black mold. And I know there's been some contention that this was the fault of Ida, but again, this sort of shows not so much. And the stuff that makes the headlines are these larger properties, Oakmont, the Willows, the ones that you see these bigger complexes. But I want to be clear that there are negligent landlords who own smaller properties too. And so this is from a double owned by Josh Bruno. This is a client that we worked with in 2014 on Harmony Street. You can see the serious hole in the roof that then caused a lot of mold that damaged a lot of her property. Hannah also mentioned Park Fontaine, and that is also not our recent issue. This is from a client we worked with in 2019. This is actually a video that shows water sort of streaming through her ceiling. I'm not sure if that's going to play, but you can go to the next one. But it was threatening to collapse, and the mold sort of sickened her entire family. You can go to the next one. But the health impacts are particularly concerning, and I want to drill down on one that Dr. Avegno mentioned, which is heat-related health issues. These photos come from a client who was working with IC Change to monitor heat in his apartment. The window unit just blew hot air, and it was actually hotter inside than it was outside, like in the 90s in his house. It was so hot that his wife could no longer stay there safely because of health issues that she had. And the thermal image on the right measured the temperature in his bedroom at the coolest part of the night, and it was still 82 degrees, which is incredibly dangerous because prolonged exposure to temperatures exceeding 80 degrees, particularly at night, results in increased hospital admissions, deaths, and then costs to the healthcare system. And unfortunately, we had direct experience with that after Ida. But it's also the sort of thing that happens on just a regular day in New Orleans. And so this is a toddler who was hospitalized in June because her landlord refused to fix the AC in their unit. And so I'll just say that every single one of the clients that we've worked with who have submitted these photos or been featured in these news stories have been displaced. We've never worked with a client, I've never worked with a client who has had their unit repaired and been able to stay. And so Oakmont and Park Fontaine are some of the more serious examples, but this just happens in a really routine way in properties all over the city. And it sets up a revolving door for people because their landlord won't fix anything. And that's obviously awful for families and causes all sorts of financial strain. But the high turnover at these buildings can also lead them to be very dangerous. There's been a lot of research on this that shows that it's not so much broken windows, but a high turnover and a lack of trust between residents and fewer eyes on the street that is one of the #1 predictors of crime. And sadly, this headline sort of says it all, but it's not unusual to see headlines like this when you Google some of the worst buildings in the city. And then if you see a concentration of blighted properties like this, it can also start to lower property values. And so, like I said before, there are unsafe properties in every district, but we know that these are often concentrated in Black neighborhoods. And then when that happens, that become another barrier to Black families building wealth through home ownership because their property values are depressed by these slum properties. So for all these reasons, we know this doesn't just impact renters, it impacts homeowners and whole neighborhoods. And then there's also, this is one last example I'm going to share just to make the sort of explain that this is a climate change and disaster resilience issue as well. If our rental housing stock was maintained, then we wouldn't have to deal with serious catastrophes after storms. So as an example, WDSU did an investigative series back in 2019 about Carmel Spring and Carmel Brook and a number of other properties in the east, and found tons of leaks and mold and serious fire hazards. During Hurricane Ida, those leaks turned into deluges and then festered and became fungal and mold blooms. And Hannah and I both canvassed those properties after the storm, and there were hundreds of tenants who were displaced from those units. And not long after they were displaced and those buildings, some of those buildings were emptied out. Again, no one had fixed those fire hazards, and one of those buildings burned and then had to be demolished, and this trash pile sat there for months. Again, if we actually required people to maintain their properties, we wouldn't have to deal with massive displacement and neighborhood nuisances like this. So that's the rationale. I'm now going to sort of take us through the ordinance piece by piece. So the goal here was not to reinvent the wheel, but to use best practices from other cities and tailor it to New Orleans. And so the problem isn't unique, obviously, to us. And so we're lucky to have some other cities to look to. These are just a few examples: Dallas, Omaha, Little Rock, Fresno, Minneapolis. Those are all sort of medium to large size cities, but we started looking at places that had similar policies. And this also includes like small towns in Alabama. It includes dozens of suburbs in Texas. And it includes nearly every city in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and lots of other places. So big and small, red and blue, like Fresno passed this under a Republican administration. It shows that this is just a bipartisan issue. And the first thing that they all do, these are sort of the different pieces of the ordinance, so I'm just going to explain them quickly. They all start by requiring rental properties to register annually with the city. And that may be new for landlords here, but almost every other business already has to do this through an occupational license. Actually, if you rent anything else, cars, moving trucks, furniture, power tools, you already need to register with the city and pay some sort of fee. Some of the only people we exempt are long-term rentals, and this would just bring them up to the standard of all other businesses. And it ensures that if there's an issue, the city knows who to call, and whether that's the owner or the property manager, and has their information. Once owners register their rental properties, they're going to receive a certificate of compliance, which they'll renew annually or upon change of the owner. And when landlords register, they're going to self-certify that their properties meet basic health and safety standards. So no inspection is needed to register. It's just a self-attestation. And when we say basic, we mean only the most serious violations are taken into consideration. So this is a place where we actually differ from many other jurisdictions, which require certification that a property meets their entire minimum property maintenance code. We decided to actually be a little more lenient here. New Orleans City Code has 74 different building codes, safety codes for every occupied building. We took what we thought were only the 11 most serious violations and included them here. So that's operating plumbing and electric, working heating and cooling, as well as roofs, windows, doors, and walls without holes, leaks, mold, or rodents. It's a pretty basic standard. The only thing that's new here that isn't already on the books is a cooling standard. And we already have city code requiring heating standards. So in the cold, you have to make sure your property can be 68 degrees because we understand that's a health risk. But we don't have anything similar for cooling or AC. And more people die each year from extreme heat than any other weather-related event. That's especially important here, obviously along the Gulf Coast, where we are seeing more and more extreme heat days. And we often see people sent to the hospital because of this, like that toddler I mentioned earlier. And of course, climate change is only going to make this worse. We get 35 extreme heat days a year now. We're going to be up to 115 by 2050. So in crafting this, we looked at other jurisdictions. And so this is based on other places like Dallas and Phoenix. They require the entire unit to maintain a certain temperature. We tried to tailor this to New Orleans. We know that it's really difficult for a window unit to cool an entire unit, especially in an old home. And so we said we would only set the temperature for bedrooms because, again, that's where this matters the most to make sure people don't have to go to the hospital. We also went over these standards with a number of developers and landlords to make sure we weren't dinging people for small issues. So one example of that is that if an inspector were to come in and your smoke detector doesn't have batteries, that's not a violation as long as it works when you put new batteries in there. So I'm going to move on real quick to inspections. The ordinance sets up a trust but verify system. So once everyone is registered and certified, the verification step begins in the form of periodic inspections every 3 years. And that's to ensure that the certifications are accurate and the properties are actually up to code. Many other cities include everyone in these periodic inspections in order to cut the bad actors. We again chose to provide some exemptions to tailor this to New Orleans. So the primary exemption from periodic inspections is for small landlords. Under the ordinance, small landlords are defined as those who own their property as a natural person in their name rather than as an LLC or some other business entity. And to qualify, the property also has to have 4 units or less. These are typically people who live on the other side of their double or triple. And so there's like a rational basis here to think that they would be more attentive to issues because they would also impact them. Because of our relatively low density and the fact that we have so many of these doubles and triples, we actually estimate this accounts for almost half of all rental units in the city that we are exempting from periodic inspections. So it's a really significant exemption. We've actually heard concerns that this means we're going to miss some really dangerous properties, and we have some of those concerns as well. But we're really attempting to create a system that was relatively easy for the smaller mom and pop business. And again, there is this rational basis that if you live next door to your renter, you're going to take better care of your property. The other exemption we've included is for affordable housing units, and there's some, I think, some misinformation about this, but they're only excluded if they already undergo a similar or more serious inspection. And that's the case with nearly every affordable housing program that we're aware of. They're required to undergo inspections not every 3 years, but every year. And their inspection standard is far more strict than the one provided for here. So it didn't make sense to require duplicate inspections there when we could focus attention on the buildings that don't get inspected at all right now. We did include a provision here, though, to make sure that people who live in affordable housing, if that system isn't working for them, would still be able to file a complaint. The last exemption is fairly common, and it just says that if your building is recently constructed or recently renovated, then you also get a 3-year exemption because you were recently passed an inspection with building inspectors. That means that the non-exempt properties that remain include investment properties owned as an LLC or some other business entity or any building with 5 units or more. And the owners of these properties also complete a self-certification, and then the city will schedule an inspection sometime in the next 3 years to make sure that the self-certification is accurate. So the ordinance also ensures that only a sample of units need to be inspected in larger properties rather than every single unit. That follows best practices. It also saves the owner time and money and allows the city to target our resources where they're needed most. So the owners will have notice of the inspection and opportunity to reschedule without penalty. And if a renter refuses entry, that's not something we penalize the landlord for. And then units that pass inspection won't be bothered again for 3 years. Both the administration and Councilmember Morrell have also committed to hiring national experts to help implement this program, so it's not left entirely to code enforcement. That will help ensure a streamlined process for owners who comply. It'll also help us root out the bad actors who try and avoid this. And this is pretty typical of similarly sized cities. And the goal there is to enlist that outside help to make sure that we are limiting the demand on larger owners' time to something like, under an hour each year to fill out the form to make sure you're registered, and then possibly a day or two every 3 years to supervise inspections. So to move on to enforcement, if a unit fails its first inspection, the owner will have time to correct the issue before a second inspection. And if you have 2 failed inspections in a row, that's when enforcement starts. And enforcement will follow the typical rules that allow for capped daily fines and allow an owner to contest this in an administrative hearing. So that's already sort of set up. Some of the examples I showed at the beginning illustrate that some of the worst actors consider these fines the sort of cost of doing business, and it doesn't change their behavior. They simply lease up to a new tenant and continue collecting rent. So in those rare scenarios where owners refuse to comply, the city could eventually ask a hearing officer to pull the certificate of compliance so that the owners can no longer rent the unit legally. And like we do with short-term rentals, they could also potentially have the power to shut off the power, assuming the tenant has vacated the unit. We should note here that the incentives point to the city only seeking this sort of sparingly and in the most serious of cases, because it obviously burdens the renter, it costs the city money in anti-displacement costs, and it takes properties offline, not something we want to do unnecessarily. So I'll also mention that ordinance currently has a provision that says that once a certificate of compliance has been pulled, it can't be reissued for 9 months. The goal was to ensure bad actors weren't making quick shoddy repairs, but I think Councilmember Morel has agreed to remove that provision because we feel confident that the fact that violations have to be cured and all outstanding fines and fees have to be paid before a unit can be rented, that is sort of sufficient to make sure it's ready for new tenants. In these rare scenarios where a certificate of compliance has to be rescinded and it's too dangerous for a tenant to live there, the ordinance also ensures that there's an anti-displacement fund to provide some resources for those displaced tenants, things like moving costs, finding a place to store stuff or security deposit in a future unit. And the legislation creating that fund is going to be introduced at the next council hearing, and it will be primarily funded through fines. I think it's also available here. And then Hannah covered the anti-retaliation provisions of this. As she mentioned, it's not going to solve all our problems, but it's really important, especially for the units that are exempted from periodic inspections. And then, as with most of the cities that implement this kind of program, the program will be revenue neutral, meaning that the fees that will be set to simply make sure that the city can cover the cost of operation. We wouldn't actually be able to exceed that, or it would no longer function as a fee. So again, this will be new for owners of rental property, but the annual registration fee of $60 is on par with most of their cities and also on the low end of what nearly every other business in New Orleans pays for its occupational license. Those typically start at $50 to $60 a year and then range into the thousands depending on how much revenue you're pulling in. The periodic inspection fee is set at $150, which is also similar to other cities. And as a reminder, will only be assessed once every 3 years and not typically on every unit in a building, instead only on a fraction of them that are being inspected. So the fee ends up getting spread over multiple years over multiple units. It's also important to note that complaint-based inspections will continue to function as they normally do. So the ordinance does not add a new fee for a complaint-based inspection. We did that on purpose to protect landlords against bad faith complaints. And we did a lot of research on these programs before recommending them because we knew that we would hear concerns about fees raising rents. Obviously, the Fair Housing Action Center would be very concerned about that as well. But we haven't yet found any data to suggest that implementing a healthy homes program systematically increases rents or displaces residents, or that cities with these programs have higher rents than cities that don't have them. And, you know, I think there is, that's likely because most landlords don't charge, set rent based entirely on their costs. They set it on what the market will bear. I think there are probably some sort of benevolent smaller landlords who do try and keep their rents below market and set their rents based on costs. We certainly appreciate them. And so if this smaller group were to pass the costs on to their tenants, again, if they're just smaller landlords and they're paying the registration fee, that works out to about $5 a month. So the data doesn't suggest that that's going to cause widespread or increased displacement. And then we also tried to set up some supports for these smaller owners and rental owners who want to do the right thing, but maybe short on capital. This doesn't require an ordinance, so it's not listed here, but the Office of Community Development has been working on building a new rental repair program that is designed to assist more cash-strapped owners. It would provide grants and forgivable loans to cover the cost of necessary repairs. In exchange, the owners would then agree not to increase their rents for a number of years. So that benefits small owners, it benefits tenants and fixes their health and safety issues, and then it also preserves some naturally occurring affordable housing. So it's really a win-win-win. The last piece here is public data. This is a commitment to transparency. So the code enforcement issues can currently be tracked through the city's one-stop app. This ordinance ensures that the public will continue to have access to that data on violations, inspections, and whether rental buildings have a valid certificate of compliance. Just as it works currently, it will not make any personal information of renters or owners available. And there's obviously benefits here to both renters and owners. Renters could use it if they were, before they were leasing up a unit to see whether or not it's got any serious issues. Owners who pass inspections could similarly use it to tout their record as a good owner. And this other cities, we could consider this have considered offering incentives to owners who have positive records. So that's something we could do too. So I think that summarizes the main points. Thank you for sticking with me. Again, we really tried to create an ordinance that is tailored to our city and is a relatively easy lift for good actors while giving us the data and tools we need to root out and hold accountable the bad actors. So that's our hope, is to do that and really make this something that benefits everyone. So thank you, council members.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Dr. Vegna, for being here today. Do any council members have questions for the people at the table? Councilman Druso.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, and Max, I apologize because I should have talked to you before this, but we have our blight ordinance that's going forward on Thursday, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder, council member, but I do kind of want to see how you see that fitting in schematically with what's being offered today, specifically two pieces, or maybe there's more. The first is we've revised the penalties to say that regardless of the number of structures on a parcel or lot, each violation on each unit of each structure shall be counted as a separate violation. So I just want to make, and again, Max, I really don't mean to put you or Hannah on the spot here, but I just want to make sure that you agree with that is a better policy, that rather than a single structure, we're seeing a one violation, that in fact, if 18 units are affected, there's 18 violations instead.
Yeah, we think that's a great compliment to this. And I know Hannah has been talking about this for a while, because when they find really terrible properties, that's one of the problems, is that for a long time, they've only been hit with one violation when there are often, they affect multiple units.
Okay. And then number two, Hannah, the other thing that we did was we made the daily fines hearings earlier. If one is found, I see shaking of heads. So I hope that's positive. But rather than letting it go for forever, if at the initial hearing, for example, if you have one of these properties that has been in and out of code enforcement adjudication, then the hearing has to be set within 60 days. And then the fines start accruing on daily fines from the date of the first violation. I assume that's something that also gives more teeth for bad landlords as well. Either Max or Hannah.
Yeah, absolutely. We think that's, I mean, you know, I mentioned before that it took a former council member had years to get this done on one property. Hopefully this will help speed things up and make it more efficient.
Okay, and I just want to also publicly say thanks. I think we removed the language about tenants being part of the owner group as well. And I know that's significantly in part to the concerns that you all raised. So thank you.
Well, also, congratulations on getting your pool filled.
I was going to get to Department Head Mulligan in a second. Yes, the pool is being filled right now, 17 years.
17 years of a pool that was a hazard to the community, kids falling into basically a septic pond. And he finally got it filled.
I mean, honestly, the city put a covering on top of it, and when they pulled it off, the pool was nearly completely full from all the rainwater and other water that got in there. It's amazing. And so this is, I will say this, it's hard to keep residents happy sometimes. These were the most ecstatic I've seen residents in a long time. So thank you to code enforcement and the city for doing it. Thank you, council member.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Thank you, Councilmember Morrell. Oakmont was mentioned quite a few times, and just want to let the public that's present and watching know that myself, code enforcement, Ms. Adams, were you with us with the Oakmont walkthrough? Well, we did
I can't probably.
I think you were. So we have walked that property. That property is in bankruptcy in federal court. Actually met with Councilmember Harris and her staff about other properties owned by that owner. So just want to let people know that that property and others owned by the owner is on our radar. It has, I know Oakmont has been, is vacant. No one lives there. The city got most of the tenants out and put them in either temporary or long-term housing. As far as the bankruptcy, we met, excuse me, we sat down and met with the trustee, who is, I believe, is in receivership of the property. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. Yeah.
The trustee. So the owner is no longer operating anything. It's in the trustee's hands. We met with his attorney. We met with the attorneys for Fannie Mae, who is the lender. So I know we have people in here who are concerned about Oakmont. That is in District C, that is in Algiers, and we are working around the clock, doing as much as we can with the with it being in bankruptcy court, to make sure that that property is repaired. I'll leave it at that, or something can be done in the near future with that property. We also have in Algiers, Park Fontaine, which is a couple blocks from Oakmont and is running the risk of being the new Oakmont. So I know Miss Adams, you were at that walkthrough. We also had some media. Mr. Career was there. Code enforcement came through, and I can tell you firsthand, I'm not telling you what I seen on the screen, but what I saw myself was mold, pools that were filled with water, that were green with broken gates to the pool. There was no security guard at the front gate. The gate stayed open. One lady had a dry vac that she kept on standby in her bathroom because of the leaks. The tubs didn't flow didn't drain for years. Mushrooms growing out of the carpet. These are some of the things that I saw with my own two eyes with code enforcement, with Ms. Adams, with my staff while walking Park Fontaine. So these properties, I know these are the two of the largest ones that were mentioned today. They're in District C, they're in Algiers. They have my undivided attention. I know Park Fontaine is owned by the owner of the Willows, some out of state landlords who lost their HUD funding in other states. So just want to let the public know that these two properties, they were mentioned earlier, they're on my radar, they're on code enforcement's radar. Maxwell, you know about them, Ms. Adams as well. So I just want to let everyone know that we are working on those individually and collectively to get those properties rehabbed and people in them. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything? Okay, thank y'all very much for your presentation. Before we get started, I want to set some ground rules. First off, we have interpreters present. Everyone will get 2 minutes. If you require an interpreter, you will get 3 minutes. That is the only real deviation there. We will take up the opposition first, then we will go to those individuals who have information only, and after that, we will go to those who are in support. So that is the order in which we'll go. So first, we'll go to the opposition. We have Mr. Schmidt. Or Ms. Schmidt, I apologize.
Councilmember, can I just clarify that this is for Spanish speakers?
Sorry, Spanish speakers, I apologize. We have interpreters for Spanish speakers because that was what was requested in advance. So thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Me llamo Amelia y voy a ser la intérprete de esta tarde. Si alguien quisiera dejar su comentario en español, me avisa a mí primero y van a dejar que tomen 3 minutos si quieres dejar el comentario en español. Primero va la oposición, primero va la oposición, segundo, las personas que van a prestar información nada más y luego tercero van las personas que están a favor de esto. Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt first. Evan Schmidt. Oh, there he is. All right.
Good afternoon. Evan Schmidt. I represent Pontchartrain Oaks Apartments in opposition to the Healthy Homes Ordinance. My client has spent in the last 14 months over $4.3 million post-IDA in improving his property. He is in New Orleans East. He has tried to maintain very affordable housing, but very dignified housing. And by imposing upon the vast majority of these landlords these costs and these regulatory burdens, it's going to increase the cost, which ultimately will be borne by the tenants, who, from the earlier testimony today, we already know are already burdened. And from what I've heard from you all, from what I've heard from the speakers that have come out here, we do have a problem in the city, but it's in large part a minority group of bad landlords that are already subject to the enforcement of the city. And what we really need to do is what the Councilman King is doing, get enforcement out there on the bad guys. And the vast majority of the landlords out here don't need this additional burden. And you're working directly against the affordable housing that I constantly hear everybody saying we need more affordable housing. This is only going to increase the cost of housing on everybody.
Your time is up, Mr. Schmidt.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Ms. Ansardi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm Jennifer Ansardi. I represent the Apartment Association of Greater New Orleans. We are here in opposition to this Healthy Homes Ordinance. The rental housing inspection laws place an unnecessary financial hardship on owners, infringe on personal privacy rights, and single out apartment housing while excluding other property types. These mandatory programs such as this one do not distinguish between the good and bad actors. Fees and inspections are imposed on everyone. These increased operating costs for owners will be passed on to the residents in the form of higher rents, security deposits, and fees, making housing less affordable. A program such as this one requires a serious financial commitment from the local government to ensure enforcement and timely inspections. These administrative costs will be shouldered by the apartment owners through registration and inspection fees. There are existing laws, like has been indicated, that empower the Department of Code Enforcement and other agencies to remedy these violations. And the Apartment Association of Greater New Orleans would like to encourage you to consider ways of enforcing these existing laws and ordinances that rely on a complaint-based driven system rather than a system that punishes the good actors. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Ansari. Next up, Mr. Kraft. Mr. Kraft. Last call, Mr. Kraft. All right. Mr. Rather.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Jim Rather. I'm the attorney for the Apartment Association of Greater New Orleans. We respectfully oppose the ordinance. There are bad actor landlords. We've heard the same names over and over and over again today. It's the same names over and over. The solution isn't to punish the good landlords, and that's what this would do. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a blanket approach. It's a fee, a tax, whatever you want to call it, on the good landlords as well. We support healthy homes. There is already a healthy home program in New Orleans. It's called the Minimum Property Maintenance Code. It's chapter 26 in the Code of Ordinances. Begins at section 146. It prohibits rodents. It prohibits roof leaks. It requires heating. It requires safe electrical. The vast majority of everything that's in the Healthy Homes program is already required under the Minimum Property Maintenance Code. The solution isn't more laws. The solution is to enforce existing laws. All we have to do is enforce existing laws, and the vast majority of these problems will be remedied. We also have a concern. This amounts to a warrantless search. It is unconstitutional. It's been found unconstitutional by the Kamara case in 1967 and by the Patel case about 7 years ago. It's a search without a warrant. And so we have concerns on that basis as well. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Next.
Ask them now, JP. Oh, I'm gonna say it. Respect people.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give everybody the opportunity to speak, and please be respectful, because we want everyone to be respectful to each other, and we're here to hear what everyone has to say. Mr. Birdsong.
Good afternoon. My name is David Birdsong. I am a property owner in Orleans Parish, and I'm also a member of the board of the New Orleans Real Estate Investors Association, which is a nonprofit corporation that's been around for over 30 years. representing investors who have over 1,000 rental units. We object to this ordinance because while we can understand the problems that have been raised with all these type of landlords, quite frankly, I don't know why you don't just call this the Joseph Bruno ordinance. As a landlord, quite personally, I'm somewhat offended by being lumped in with him in the way that this ordinance is going to affect the people who are the good actors. Far and away, the landlords maintain their properties properly. You are going to be forcing the code enforcement department to spend a lot of time dealing with properties that have not had any problems, as opposed to dealing with the problems that are currently there. We talk in our organization about the best way to be a good landlord is to have your tenant stay there as long as possible. It costs us as a landlord when a tenant moves out because of the additional wear and tear on the property, the vacancy cost, everything like that. So it's really in our best interest to see that the property is maintained correctly. There are a lot of different ways that the city should be working with the landlords to facilitate not an adversarial proceeding between all tenants and all landlords, but a partnership, because that's what it really is. As a landlord, if we put someone into a property that we have spent $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 or more on, we're trusting that tenant to take care of that property. And we want to help them do it, and we want the city to help us in that respect as well. The code enforcement ordinances are
Thank you,
already
Mr.
in
Birdsong.
place.
That's your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Mr. Jarrett, Devon Jarrett.
Good afternoon, council. My name is Devon Jarrett. I'm a practicing attorney here in New Orleans. I predominantly represent residents and tenants who have been exposed to various hazardous conditions as a result of slumlords. These conditions range from mold, extensive water leaks, feces throughout their apartment as it relates to sewage backup.
I'm sorry, Mr. Jarrett, I got you in the wrong pile. Let me.
Oh, yeah, I'm actually a proponent. I'm actually a proponent.
That's why I said, so let me, I don't want to get in trouble. I'll put you at the top of the pile for proponents, but I pulled you out of order. That's my bad. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I was like, wait a second. Sounds like he's for it. All right. Mrs. Courtney Freed. Am I saying your name correctly, Miss Freed? I'm come right back to you, Mr. Jarrett, I promise.
Good afternoon, council. My name is Courtney Fricky. I run the North Shore Real Estate Investors Association, where we have many constituents as well as investors who travel. It is an education-based network that wants to promote good faith investors. I also have the privilege of being on WWL radio every weekend as a co-host of the Home Improvement Show. As WWL being one of the largest stations, it is a live call-in show every weekend where I'm hearing from mom and pop landlords with oftentimes it is in their best interest to not own it in their own name. So they would not be exempt from this ordinance here. We are in opposition of this because right now we can't be compared to the Pittsburghs, to the other cities in this nation. New Orleans is facing various issues that cannot be compared to other cities. For example, with the insurance costs rising, the burdens that are facing landlords right now, it's causing the good faith actors to question if they want to stay in this area. And so I welcome both the council, conversations with the council as a representative of many of the mom and pop landlords. They're often the good faith actors who we do oppose the slumlords. And I'm with Mr. Birdsong. I'm offended to be lumped in as a investor in Orleans Parish who just last week bought another property in Orleans Parish that wants to add good housing in this area. But to continue to do so is another nail in the coffin, adding burden when the good faith actors are already kicked. They're already down due to the rise of every cost. What will keep good faith actors here? Please don't have a shotgun approach. Please have a very sniper-based approach. And I do welcome both the media and the council further conversations to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Domingo Coria. Domingo Coria.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Domingo Correa, 205 Germain Street. There's no question that the safety of the tenants is the most important aspect of my job as a landlord, and that the bad landlord should be exposed. I think we all agree on this principle. There are two main issues with this legislation as I see it. First is the fact that it would create an entirely new bureaucracy with more layers of difficulty for landlords to establish themselves in New Orleans to create a supply of housing, to help with this housing scarcity issue that we all know exists. Many new inspectors, administrators, hearing officers, caseworkers would have to be hired at great expense in order to manage the system, when the city is not able to hire enough police. Which brings me to the second issue, which is fees and affordability. Hiring all of these new employees by using registration fees of $60, inspection fees of $150, reapplication fee of $75, reinspection fee of $200, all this is on top of a massive property tax that's already being paid to enforce the housing safety codes that are already in place. Add this to the 63% increase, and you can Google it, in the New Orleans area for hazard insurance. The simple question is this: how can this ordinance help affordability? There is an answer to keeping tenants safe, creating more housing, and keeping costs low. Effectively enforce the laws already on the books. Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Domingo, before you go, I had the opportunity to read your email that you sent around.
Yes.
And I think it's important to clarify a couple of things.
Okay.
I believe in the email you said that this would result into a net increase per unit of the rental fee and the inspection fee per year.
I didn't say that.
Okay. I just want to clarify for everyone, the inspection fee is separate from the inspection. So the inspection fee is separate from the registration fee, and the inspection fee is once per 3 years. And if you fall under the mom and pop provision, you do not have an inspection fee because you're only inspected if someone makes a complaint.
As my previous speaker pointed out, look, most mom and pops do, to protect themselves, have an LLC. So they're going to be affected by that.
Well, I think there's a difference between, and I appreciate this opportunity to educate. I've met with several landlords, and I think that what I find difficult sometimes is it makes more sense to engage with council members and say, this is a problem, can we work together to solve it, than to say this is another reason to not be for something. I've heard from other landlords regarding the LLC issue, and I tend to have some agreement with you in regard to, I think for tax purposes, there is going to have to be some
Not just for
revisit.
tax,
But
it's liability. It protects your personal assets.
But the point I'm making, is that oftentimes, and I encourage everyone in the legislative process, if you have concerns with the bill, it's more productive to say, can I meet with you and talk about what my issues are, rather than taking the most harsh and critical version of an interpretation to rile up people to be against something. Because legislation as it's introduced, and this is really an education for everyone listening, very seldom in a council or a legislative body is the bill as filed is the bill that is passed. And I think that if more people, when they see a bill and they go, well, I agree with the principle, but I have concerns with some of the parts of it, I think it's more worthwhile, rather than trying to rile up people to be against something, to say, hey, can I have a meeting with you to talk about what my concerns are? Because I will tell you candidly, many landlords have met with me and they said, hey, I'm a good actor. I've got this concern, I've got that concern. I go, man, I did not think of that, because personally, I'm not a landlord. But I just think it'd be a more productive use of time, because when I read your email, it was fear mongering. And it was,
Well, that's an unfair characterization.
I am happy.
Why don't we read it right now?
Well, no, I'm happy for everyone who wants to see a copy of Mr. Domingo's email. Please send me your email and I'll send it to you and you can read it.
Judge for yourself. Judge for yourself.
Well, I don't want to give them 1-2 minutes, Freddie. We'll be here for a while, but I'm happy to let you judge for yourselves. But my point being that for everyone listening, if you see legislation that you think you could be for, but you have concerns, reach out to the council member and speak to them about your concerns, because we are not Moses. These laws are not written in stone. And if you have concerns and we can address it, my goal is to bring people together, not take them apart. And I think that there are plenty of opportunities with this legislation and others that if you want to be part of working together on a solution, I welcome input. And I would encourage you, because like I said, I think the LLC issue for small landowners is a concern, because anybody who talks to a CPA, they're going to tell them if you own any investment property, you need to not own it personally. So
I agree.
But my point being that you might be better served, because I didn't get your email. I got it from somebody else.
Whoa. Check your email.
I'll check it, but I got it from somebody else.
I sent it at approximately 10:13 today, right to your inbox.
10:13 to, well, you sent it to everybody else long before 10:13 today.
Well, I sent it to Mike. No. We do have a constituency here, and that's who I sent it to.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Valet.
I just want to add, I want to bootstrap to what you just said too. I've also gotten emails about being against it. And then I asked them, well, have you read this provision? And no. And then you read it, oh, well, my concern is addressed. Now, that's not to say there aren't going to be ongoing concerns, but I feel like sometimes people are afraid of an ordinance and they haven't read the ordinance. And so I would also encourage people, if you want to yell at me about what something says, please read it first. I mean, I've gotten emails where literally this is the exemption, like the exemption, for example, on federal properties that are already inspected. People don't realize that that's part of what's baked into here too. So again, I'm always happy for somebody to tell me I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I don't know what I'm doing, but please read the ordinance first before you tell me what something is in it or isn't, because that's a problem we're playing triage with too. Thank you.
Mr. Valle.
Good afternoon. I'm Donald Valle. I'm president of the Landlord Advisory Committee, which deals with the Section 8 properties with the Housing Authority. As you know, our Landlords Association has 7,580 landlords in it. Only 250 own more than 11 units. The rest of the landlords are mom and pops. We have provided education over the last 15 years through them and for various meetings and talking about how to lease a property up, et cetera. We are subject to what's called a HQS. It's a housing quality standard. It is a federal requirement that we have to maintain safe, decent, sanitary homes. There's a whole list of requirements that are put on us as to what we have to do to provide for tenants. We go through an annual inspection, a move-in inspection, and a housing inspection when there's a complaint that's made. As such, if it's failed to perform, we're cut off on the rents. Back in 2017 and 2019, these issues of what we call rental registry came up once before. It was legislations. Unfortunately, years ago, we used to work with the former director of the Fair Housing. They called us. We worked with the legal aid group. Laura Tuggle, who runs that agency, was a member of our board. We brought him in to discuss the problems at hand. I don't want to say I'm opposed, as you said, Councilman, but it's unnecessary. We went through and sat down with the administration numerous times about putting in proper code enforcement and steps to prevent what's been happening with these properties. It's unfortunate your hands are tied. You're the legislators. It's the administration that needs to take over code enforcement and make sure all these people have good sanitary homes to live in, without question. And it possibly should be somewhere that they can be relocated in the event. You have unusual circumstances where you have the bankruptcy situation where you can't do anything about it. That's unfortunate. As a banker for 25 years, I faced that consequence as well. It takes a while. You had to provide for it. I think we do need to sit down with you all, bring in a number of the proper landlords that know about this thing, that's been through the thing before, and work with you and the administration in trying to set up something that prevents this in the future again. I thought we did that in 2017 and 19. It was not haphazard. It was well planned and well thought out. I've already contacted your office to try to make that. And you and I have known each other for a long time, Mr. Green. I've been on the housing boards in Baton Rouge. We provided the low-income housing tax credits for the city. We've talked to them. All this is going to do, frankly, in what I see, is going to chase people away from providing affordable housing in this community, which we desperately need. We work with that. I worked with the city administration after the hurricane to bring back the landlords and the properties. We did the LRA in Baton Rouge, which you were on the board up at Baton Rouge. You know, there's ways to do it, but this isn't the way, I can tell you. But I'll cut it off there.
I think Mr. Graham has a question for you. Are you good? Oh, he's good. Oh,
I'm sorry, I did.
sorry,
Mr. Valley,
Valet.
I just want to
Mr. Graham has a
confirm,
question.
the Landlord's Advisory Committee oversees all Section 8 programs? I mean, and all of your rental units are Section 8?
Yes. Well, we serve, there's 18,000 vouchers dealt with Hanover. Of that, we estimate there's somewhere around a 50 or 57,000 population that we've housed in the city.
Some, I guess.
Just Section 8 alone, not any other units.
I'm looking to my left to Mr. Morrell to make sure that I didn't miss an amendment or something, but technically you only have to register, but you don't have an annual inspection.
That is correct.
I just want to make sure that I didn't miss an amendment.
The,
It's important, Mr. Valley,
because
because the public is watching. There's not going to be an inspection every year or a couple of years of Section 8 properties. Now, I just want to make sure that we're clear on this, because sometimes an amendment happens that I miss. So I just want to make sure.
it's in the current bill. It's not an amendment.
And-
It's an actual bill currently.
And you're
There
speaking
are-
for the Landlord's Advisory Committee, and I want the landlords who are here to know, just because it's factual. Whenever I hear something that's a little bit off, no matter what position I have on it, I just want to make sure that the Landlord Advisory Commission members know that they're not going to be subject to this inspection, because they do have that house
They're already
quality
subject to
inspection.
They're already subject to inspections.
Right.
But they're subject to a fee and registration, all that, it's unnecessary.
So you're opposed to the registration fee?
I'm opposed to that.
You use
part.
inspection, okay.
And I'm willing to sit down with you all and try to work out. The thing at issue in all of this, and with the HUD programs that we've dealt with, is safe, decent sanitary housing. And registration and duplication of services is unnecessary. This is code enforcement. And it's the administration's responsibility in the cities. I mean, we got blight all over the city. We have problems renting our units because we have blight next door to it. We can't get that cured. So, I mean, it's not just affecting us, it's affecting our tenants. And the biggest issue that we have with all of this is crime. We don't have enough police out there. Our tenants are scared to death to come out of their houses. They can't get out of their front yards.
Councilmember Morrell, for clarification, Councilmember Morrell, I'm looking at the language and it says, because the provision of affordable housing in the city constitutes a valid and important public purpose, affordable housing units shall be exempt from registration fees pursuant to subsection A. Is that changed?
Is Max still here? Come on up, Max. I think Max can give better clarification, but my understanding of the bill dealt with the fees regarding to inspection, not the $60 registration fee.
No, Councilmember Harris, thank you for pointing that out. That's correct. Affordable housing units, including all the units that Mr. Valet owns, will not be subject to any fees or inspections, because they are already subject to inspections, and they obviously are not turning a profit. They're affordable housing units. We did that on purpose. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification, Max.
What about registration?
He just said you're not subject to either.
Not subject to registration either.
You're still subject to fill it out, where you're not subject to the fee. That is what Mr. Chartulo just clarified.
Again, unnecessary, but thank you.
Okay. Last up in opposition, we have, I want to say it's Miss Prejean, but I could be mispronouncing that. Please correct me if I do. If I am please forgive me if I mispronounce anyone's name. I will do my best because I am not the best at reading handwriting.
Okay, I'm with Ladder and Bloom Property Management, and I also represent the Institute of Real Estate Management, known as IREM. We oppose it for several reasons, not just the cost, which could get passed to the tenant, but also the time involved. Sometimes we have people apply for an apartment, they need to get in the next day or 2 days later. We're waiting on inspections, or maybe they go out and find, a stove burner we didn't realize wasn't working, then we have to wait another 3 weeks, for someone to come out. I mean, we agree. I mean, I have properties of my own. I think, there are a lot of good landlords and we represent a lot of them, but there are a lot of bad landlords. I think what's broken here is the fact that some of the other speakers said, the code enforcement, maybe you don't have enough people or the whole department needs to be revamped or whatever, and we're willing to help. But I think that's where it should lie, that's where the work needs to be done. I mean, these landlords, these are pictures you see, it should have never gotten to that point. Obviously, I guess they were reprimanded prior, but why did it get to that point that people had to live like that? That's why we have code enforcement.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have two individuals providing information will not like to speak in support or opposition. First, we have Mr. Stephen Nairi. And please, like I said, please correct me if my pronunciation is incorrect.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Keary.
Keary, there you go. Totally off. Okay, not even close.
Everyone gets it
Thank
wrong.
you.
I'm a resident of Orleans Parish. I'm also a landlord, rental provider in Orleans Parish, Jefferson Parish, and St. Tammany Parish. I'm definitely supportive of healthy homes. These photos you see of this mold is definitely unacceptable. You've mentioned a lot of the landlords' names, and you see it on a lot of the plaques here. I think they should be held to account. But I just want you to know that I think I'm someone that you would want doing business here. I often take blighted properties. I fix them. I put tenants in place. I look after them. I'm a good landlord, right? And I just want you to think of me when you propose these legislations, because I'm making decisions. If you don't want me here, I don't need to be here. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to fight these people. If you don't want my business, I'm going to be in Jefferson. I'm going to be in other places, and it's not going to help. It's not going to help you to have affordable homes. It's not going to help you to drive out the good landlords by extra compliance and costs. It's getting expensive. Insurance going up a lot. It is very, very hard, and I'm seeing lots of landlords struggling. So I just want you to think of me as well when you're proposing these laws.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep it moving because I want to get to all of y'all speaking too. So let's keep it moving. We have Mr. Larry Morgan. Come on now, Mr. Morgan.
Good evening, Councilman, and all the people in the house. My elders of my people had property, and there came a time when they couldn't no longer renovate them properties and take care of. So they turned it over to the young ones, and we did. But we followed their system. What we did, we kept the rent low. And by keeping it low, they taught me a lesson. When the time came, a freeze, a pipe bust, we didn't ask them. The tenant fixed it. When the time came, they needed a room painted, they didn't tell us. They bought the paint and painted it. When the time came that the grass needed cutting, they didn't call us on the phone. They did it. And you know what they did in turn? And we kept the rent low where they could afford it. And that led to they stood in those houses till they died. But the point is this: if a landlord is fair with his tenants, that landlord could profit. But if the landlord is not fair with his tenants and then greedy, he gets just what he deserves. And then in the end, you understand? The saddest part about it, he lose. And about that rent is contributable. That was the loophole to go up on the rent using the system of Section A. When they found out that the government was subsidized that money, they became more greedy. And that's why the rent is where it is today. That's the reality. But I say to you as a council, you are a better class of people. Two of you are the master in the game. You bring the new one up to your level. You can work with the people and solve this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Before I get back to you, Mr. Jarrett, I do have one second, Mr. Jarrett. I have some people from Oakmont who'd like to speak. There's 5 of you. Why don't you all come up at once? We have Arthur Dales, Tammy Gottman. If I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, please correct me. Geraldine LaPrey, Daiquiri Jones, and Y. Frank Southall.
Good evening, everybody. I would just like to say thank you for letting us speak today. And I was one of the unfortunate ones that had to go through the slumlords taking chemo, 4 or 5 hours of chemo, and I had to come home with no air conditioning. Roaches, I had to pay for the parking to come in for the roaches. I had to deal with the rats on myself, putting poison down. And the fact of the matter is, we didn't even know that we didn't have any more management because they had an answering service that was answering the phone. We was leaving the message and they wasn't getting it. I would never want anybody to go through what I went through, taking chemo and doing all of this, and the storm, being without management in the storm, then having to stay in a place where they got the ceilings is wet, and they didn't. Among other things. Now, Oakmont, you all saying repair, I say condemn. Because it's got everything. They got termites, dust mites, little mites. They got big mites and everything up in that place. It needs to be torn down. And I told Mr. Bruno that in his office. I said, you do know they have termites, don't you? He didn't answer, but they know what's going on, but they never would fix anything. And I don't want nobody to have to go through what I was going through. And this was from April before the storm, without any air up until the time and I thank God for City Hall stepping in to give us a place to stay. Because I would have been in that number on the street. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a tenant from Oakmont. And when I moved in Oakmont, and I discovered that I had plumbing problems, when my neighbor upstairs flushed the toilet, feces coming down, I gotta clean it up, go buy more shower curtains. I couldn't cook. My dogs were suffering. I paid a deposit to have my bully and my Frenchie. They suffered. They lost weight. They couldn't go out and use the bathroom outside. I had to let them use the bathroom on the side porch and clean up after them. And when I leave out my front door, which was leaning to the side, I thought I was gonna fall down in the next apartment. And when it would rain and I would come up the stairs, you had to have an umbrella to get up the steps, to get into your house. I watched the elderly around there live with green water in their tubs. They could not take a bath. They could not cook. Mildew all in the kitchen, mildew in your bedroom. How you can leave us there like that? You shut the office down. We can't no maintenance man, nobody to fix the units when the units go out. The tenant upstairs, their air conditioning leaking down into my panel, which is making a fire. When I lay in my bed at night, I had to watch fire pop from a panel. You understand me? And pray to God that I wake up the next morning. And I feel like I did not deserve that. You feel me? Upon moving in, I reported it to them. They could have at least moved me to another unit. They didn't do. They left. They received my rent. Didn't come and tend to me, not so ever. The maintenance man told me I needed to move out. Get your churn and move out, because it's about to get serious back here. I thought he was playing until I saw the darkness around me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Counsel, I am Arthur Dales, a lifelong renter in District C. I have never owned anything except the clothes in the car. Seen rent and spaces beautiful, 70s, 80s, 90s. After Katrina, moved into Oakmont. Beautiful, Aaron Bloom was managed. Had a pool, had a tennis court, had a game room. All of a sudden one day, tell me I have to pay some other guy. And from that day forward, and like she said, had to plunge in my own toe. I'm a disabled man, go up and down the steps, but I get by. But I don't expect to have the clean duty to go to the bathroom. After so long, like she said, here comes the move. And there goes the management. And all we could do was take care of each other. For the storm, we barbecued every day in order not to throw our food. But as a lifelong resident of District C and have been in nearly every apartment complex in District C, we need help in District C. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Dales. I missed one card. There's a Kirk Williamson who is in opposition. I missed this card earlier, so here's your opportunity to speak before we continue with the opponents.
Thank you, Councilman. And I really appreciate it. Kirk Williamson, member District A, citizen District A, on rental properties in District C and B. What I hear most today is a lot of agreement, actually. It's a lot of people who are in this room who agreed that everybody in this city deserves to have a good quality place to live. And sometimes when I hear booing and things like that, just please know that the landlords that are here today are the ones that care the most. And there's thousands more of us like that in this city who care about this city because we invest in this city. It's not in our best interest to make something like an Oakmont to happen, right? That is a small percent of the people, but yet it's being portrayed as if, it's this massive, massive thing. So my question is this, is that if we're going to build a brand new system outside of code enforcement, I have really two questions. One, is code enforcement here today?
Yeah, well, they were.
So they're not in the room right now, who we both agree, I believe, should be part of this conversation because they are part of the problem. If code enforcement isn't here right now, then shame on them. And two, I would like to know how many calls today, this week, this month, that they have received from tenants saying that there's an issue. How many? But how many? There's got to be a log. There's got to be a backlog. There's got to be, they're going out on calls. What is that number? Because that is a critical piece here. If we're going to build something new and saying that code enforcement doesn't work, then we need to have that data. And I think it should be easily pullable. But my point is this, and aside from all that, which is very critical to get them involved, to get those numbers, because quite frankly, I'm fundamentally going to believe it's pretty low. And so at the end of the day, there is a lot of agreement on this. And it's to hold code enforcement and the current laws in place and hold them and enforce those laws, please, or at least get that information and don't be persuaded by, some very bad actors who we all agree are bad actors. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. First, we will have Mr. Jarrett. You can come back up now. Oh, Mr. Jones, come on up. Sorry, I called you earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here to represent also some tenants at Oakmont who couldn't make it. I'm Daiquiri Jones, Community Engagement Coordinator and Organizer at Jane Place. There's many Oakmont tenants who couldn't be here due to disability issues, leg issues. In fact, there was a call I got yesterday of someone who wanted to come, but they actually had their tongue removed because of cancer due to the conditions of the place they were living. And I know a lot of people are claiming it's just a few bad landlords, but I attend to a hotline call. I get calls from all over the city. Currently, I'm talking to a lot of tenants of Laura Howard Russell, and I went, and the other day I talked to someone who told me that a neighbor of theirs, a roof fell on them and they had brain damage, and it still took months to repair. I mean, a place without a healthy homes ordinance is what attracts people like Bruno, like Lauren Howard Russell, like many other landlords that exist. And we're talking that a lot of the people who spoke in opposition, they're representing someone else, people who couldn't be here. I mean, I'm talking about people who have to move out of a hotel today and still found a way to make it over here. And it's just like a small headache, a small fee for people who are like landlords. It just seems like they're completely not caring about the community and the larger issues. I mean, no one is compensating people for, developing serious breathing issues from living in these places. I mean, if we're talking about affordability, we need to look at the tenants and what the tenants can afford. When a house is not healthy, when it's sick, when it causes people to be sick, that is a disaster that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And you can add, to what already exists. This has been proven to work. It's been proven not really to raise costs. So what I'm hearing is a bunch of people who are complaining about small fees and not about the actual constituents who suffer. I mean, I had to clean out my grandfather's place and it was so disgusting. And I could only think about all of the other places that I've seen and been to. We need a...
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I appreciate it. Mr. Jarrett, you can come back up now. After Mr. Jarrett, we are going to have Mr. Aguilar, who does require an interpreter. Oh, sorry.
I was up in the bundle as well.
Did you submit a card?
Yeah, yes.
What's that?
Southall.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Mr. Southall before you, Mr. Jarrett. Come on up, Mr. Southall. He was. I'm sorry, Mr. Jarrett. I called his name earlier, and she just. I appreciate your patience. Go ahead, Mr. Southall.
Frank Southall here, organized community engagement manager at Jane Place. I've worked with the Oakmont tenants as well. I've been working with Bruno tenants for 4 years. This is the 4th year anniversary of me working at Jane Place and being involved in doing renter strikes work. I initially chose this path 4 years ago because a friend of mine's house burnt down in mid-city. They complained about leaks. They noticed electrical issues. They were faced with retaliatory threats. And ultimately, the house burned down and led to various issues. Some of the people in this audience know these folks who lived on Bing Street. The truth of the matter is slumlords like Bruno Tober and Hamlet of the Willows, others, have made millions over the years that they get in federal and state subsidies. They need to invest our tax dollars in upkeep of these properties. Forcing landlords to upkeep their property will create more opportunities in the rental market. Look at the Carmels, the Willows, Bruno properties. If we force these people to invest tenant payments in rental properties, then more units will open up. Instead, if we go to these properties in East Algiers, half or fourth of these units are abandoned. That's affordable housing that does not exist. So I know this because I walk these complexes. I've talked to these tenants like Ms. Geraldine, Ms. Tammy, Mr. Arthur, and many of the other tenants who couldn't be here because they're being forced out of the hotel they're staying in today. So I want to be real and be honest. If you don't know this, I don't want to hear about talk about how much you care about the community. People are watching. Vote yes or expect more resistance. We're not going away. Make it easy. Do right by the people of our city. So in closing, say yes to protecting renters. Say yes to housing with dignity and respect. Say yes to protecting tenants and not slumlords, nor the multinational corporations that own buildings like the Willows, Carmel Brook, Carmel Spring. We're a majority renter city. We deserve better as renters. As a renter, we're not asking, we're demanding pass a healthy homes ordinance for the people of Orleans Parish. Thank you very much. God bless y'all.
Thank you, Mr. Southall. Mr. Jared. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Jared.
Good afternoon, council. My name is Devon Jared. I first want to start with saying I am a proponent for the Healthy Homes Ordinance. I'm currently here, attorney here in New Orleans. I represent residents, tenants who have been exposed to various hazardous conditions, widespread mold, extensive water leaks, roach infestation, rat infestation, feces throughout the apartment as it relates to sewage backup, among many other deplorable conditions. And throughout my experience of representing these residents and tenants, I've been able to see firsthand how the actions and inactions of slumlords greatly affect these residents and tenants. It affects these residents and tenants at all levels, physically, mentally, as well as financially. Physically, many residents have been exposed to these hazardous conditions and have developed short-term and long-term symptoms as a result of that. Mentally, simply speaking, these residents are completely stressed out from having to deal with these deplorable conditions on a daily basis. Financially, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients tell me that they use their last bit of money to move into an apartment complex only to find out that it later is uninhabitable. And we must keep in mind that these residents and tenants are still required to pay monthly rent at these uninhabitable residencies. I file lawsuits against many of the notorious slumlords throughout the city. I know we talked about Oakmont, I file lawsuits against them, Oakmont, Willows, Belmont Apartments, Park Montaigne. But also let me let you know this too. I've also filed lawsuits against many of those claiming that they're good actors, some who spoke here today. So as it relates to my experience and what I've seen through filing these lawsuits, the one thing that stands out to me is just the lack of accountability among slumlords and property owners. The reason why this healthy ordinance is key because there's currently not a system or any widespread